The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the first day of Rohatsu Sesshin here at Mountain Gate. And normally I would begin with Hakuin's Rohatsu exhortations as translated by Norman Waddell. However, the first part is basically fundamental Zen practice, how to sit, and so on and so forth. So we will not do that today. However, in subsequent days, we will at least share some of those exhortations, because some of them can be quite inspiring. We are in quite a time of change. It started several years ago, actually. And I think that probably people assumed that once COVID was down to a lower level of risk, that then we'd be home free. But of course, that has not been the case. For example, here at Mountain Gate, our refrigerator and our dishwasher in the kitchen died just before Sesshin. Interesting timing, but we managed to finally, I hope, we have our fingers crossed, have somebody coming to work on repairing it on Monday. It's not certain, but one of the things about living in paradise, as we are here, is that it's relatively remote and not too many people are really interested in coming up. And usually they will charge us 2 hours, the 2 hours it takes to get here and get back to one of the cities around here, whether it's Taos or Santa Fe or Espanola. And of course that adds to whatever the cost, and it also adds to the time a tradesperson is going to be working here that they wouldn't be able to work at other places. But it is what it is, and we're grateful that we live here. It's an incredible place, deeply peaceful, deeply quiet, wonderful neighbors, and a beautiful zendo with deep, deep energy. But back to this period of history, and I think people are going to look back on it in a couple of hundred years as a time of great transformation, because that is what it is. There's so much happening for so many people. Difficulties in all kinds of directions, in getting food, even if we could pay for it, it's not on the grocery store shelves. Gas for a while was extremely expensive. Now it's down, but I just saw a headline that says, for how long? And then we have things like, initially it looked like student loans might be forgiven to a certain point, and people got their hopes up, and then it got quashed, at least for now, in Congress. There's all kinds of infighting politically. There's all kinds of challenges just in everybody's lives. And that makes for an incredible opportunity for Zen practice. When things are going nicely, why practice? Unless you've got a burning need. And some of us do, but many people don't. It's only when they're pushed up against a wall that practice becomes the only option left. That happened to me when I was 32 years old, and everything I valued in life, everything I identified with in life, just crashed in shards at my feet. And I had no alternative, because nothing outside was going to make a difference. Nothing outside was going to be anything more than grasping at straws. The only place, as the Buddha also experienced, was to go within. And that meant doing Zen practice. I ended up karmically meeting somebody who actually was a member of the Rochester Zen Center in Turkey, of all places. And he loaned me a copy of The Three Pillars of Zen and a copy of a book that Roshi Kapleau had written after The Three Pillars, which was called The Wheel of Death. And since death was on my mind because everything had been lost, I read it cover to cover in one sitting. It's a very small book, by the way, and it's no longer in print, hasn't been in print for decades. It's been redone. In fact, I was Roshi Kapleau's secretary and attendant when he was redoing that book. And that's still quite a long time ago, and it was vastly expanded. So this is what happens when people hit a wall. They look somewhere else because there's nowhere else to look in the normal directions people are looking in. The normal things that suffice to give us some level of peace, happiness, ease, make us feel like we're okay. They're gone. And there's a tremendous amount of frustration right now as people battle against that. I think this is part of what's going on in Congress with all the challenges. I heard recently that the woman who barely lost for a governor in Arizona is filing a lawsuit to try to get that governorship. The whole headlines about former President Trump entertaining a white supremacist and another person who has been known to make anti-Semitic remarks. All kinds of things are happening. People are getting sick still from COVID. The mothers of two of our Sangha members died very recently. And in fact, that's one reason why Steve is not here in the session that he had originally signed up for. He's attending to arrangements for the funeral of his mother, which is going to be happening this week. So we have choices. When the way we ordinarily live is blocked, if we are allowing ourselves to be open enough, alternatives appear. When we let go having to have things a certain way, then we are able to see alternative ways to be, to live. This happens when people are, as I said, pushed up against a wall. And the primary example of this is Jacques Lucéran, who was in Buchenwald at the age of 19 and barely surviving. And after 5 months, the stress of it, the lack of any kind of nourishment, because he only had the thin soup that they allowed because the other prisoners were swiping his bread because he was blind and couldn't see. And he got sick and he was dying, and he knew he was dying. And the 3 doctors who were also prisoners in the camp diagnosed him and said the same. And so they carried him away to what they called the hospital, which was simply a piece of concrete on the ground outside. There was not even an aspirin in the camp for the prisoners. After all, they were there because they were about to be extinguished. And during the time that he was at the camp, there were executions, some of them public, some of them otherwise. some of them simply at the hands of other prisoners who had gone berserk from the stress. It was a hell realm. And he took it as long as he could, and then his body wouldn't allow it to continue. So he opened to a different way of experiencing, a different way of seeing. He let go his need to have things be the way he needed to have them be, he thought. Let that go. Let it float away. And the result was that he came to a profound awakening experience, which lasted the rest of his life, it sounds like. He died in his 40s in a car accident along with his wife. When we allow ourselves to dare to think outside the box, to dare to let go who we think we have to be, and unfortunately that is so ingrained in us, so trained in us from early age. From the moment an infant catches the eye of a parent and gives a tiny little bit of a smile, and the parent is all excited and smiles back, that is the beginning of this conditioning in this life. And it goes on from there. We learn rather rapidly what is acceptable and what is not. We get all kinds of ideas as a result of the feedback we get from adults around us about our value in life. And unfortunately, there are way too many people who have a pretty negative self-image from a very early age. My heart broke one day when I was coming out of a grocery store in Santa Fe, and coming out at the same time was a mother who was obviously not a happy camper. And she had two sons. One appeared to be about 5, and he was rolling the market basket out towards her car. And then there was a little one, 3-year-old maybe, and he was begging to help. His older brother was doing this big boy job, and he wanted to be a big boy too. And so finally his mother shoved a bag of something like potato chips in his arms, and he was so happy, and then he tripped and fell, of course, on top of the potato chips. And the result was shattering. I can only imagine how that little boy is now. That event happened, at least 15 years ago. So he would be getting close to 20 years old at this point, and what kind of a self-image does he have because of that? But we all carry our own version of that, hopefully not as negative, but many of us who find our way to Zen practice do have challenging self-images and some level of insecurity that we try to shove under the carpet as a result of that. There are many things that human beings do to other human beings that are just beginning to be realized, and this is actually part of this new paradigm. Until probably about 20 years ago, trauma was not spoken of at all, really. You had something happen to you, bad, frightening, devastating, and so get over it, is what we were normally told. But then people began to do some research into it and discovered how it impacts our very lives, how we receive things, how we feel about ourselves. Do we dare interact in certain ways? Some people end up going through their lives on autopilot, which is quite sad because life is so rich and so amazing. But if we're on autopilot because that's the safest place we seem to be, then we're going to miss a great deal of life. And it's very difficult to feel, which of course is the point, because the feelings that are buried under autopilot are not pleasant. And that's an understatement. They may be terror, they may be significantly negative feelings about ourselves, they may be fear, all kinds of things. Zen practice can help. Therapy can help. Those of us who do come to Zen practice come because there's some question, something that tickles the back of our mind, saying, maybe things aren't exactly the way society says they are. And if they're not, then how are they? And so we learn how to do Zazen. We sit in one of the positions that is normally traditional, or we sit in a chair. That's also fine. It's not necessarily as effective, at least in my own experience, because I had to sit in a chair for about a year and a half because of my knees. Now I go back and forth between sitting seiza and sitting on a chair, and we have these wonderful new tans in the zendo, so we can sit either way. You can sit cross-legged up on the tan, and because we sit rinzai style, which means facing into the room rather than facing the wall, we have that option. And of course, nowadays there's a plethora of types of cushions available to help people sit relatively comfortably. There's no point in sitting in agony. That doesn't accomplish anything. Going beyond our usual desires, there is a point in that. And this is why we encourage yaza here. Yaza is the late night sitting. Going beyond the normal schedule of formal sittings and sitting extra in the quiet of the night can be immensely powerful and extremely supportive of our practice. There is the quality of formal practice where there's bells and clappers and a specific time that we do the practice, time periods. But then if we have the whole night and we can sit in the dimness of the zendo, we can control the lights ourselves if we're the only ones there, or we can sit outside. And the moon is beginning to come towards full, I believe. And so there is a lot of light outside here in these high altitude mountains in northern New Mexico. It's quite incredible to sit outside, even in the cold. Of course, you can be wrapped up, but that's fine. The main point is to where the light comes through, the crack where the light comes through, within our own mind, to jump into that light and explore. Of course, we call it light, but in reality, we're flying blind. We are sensing our way deeper and deeper and deeper into reality. And it's a challenging thing because there's no real feedback on it. The teacher can tell exactly where we're at and give us some guidance in that direction or encouragement. But the work is one that depends on faith because there are no guidelines, because it uses a different part of our mind that isn't a 1, 2, 3 spelled out way of going about things. It's not like going to college and studying a college subject or high school or even grade school. It's more like, I think what I've heard of Montessori schools is that kids begin to experiment with things. And then there were movements in England in particular, Summerhill, I think it was called, where kids learned by doing. Up here in northern New Mexico, kids learn by doing. They also go to school. But I was just listening recently to a neighbor who was telling about his grandson, who's 12, and showing him how to drive a tractor. and letting him drive the tractor and showing him how to do some welding and letting him do it. This is how people have traditionally learned. You can also go to school and learn some of that, but what is important in Zen practice, particularly now, and in life, particularly now, is to, as I said, open to that depth that we're not normally accustomed to living from, because that is where the light lives. As a Korean Zen master so famously said, turn the light inward and trace down the radiance to its source. Turn the light inward and trace down the radiance to its source. And what better time than now to do it? There is so much pressure. There is so much change. There's so much challenge in life. Things are transforming in major ways. To be part of that transformation, to flow with it, to look inside and search deeply within. We have this capacity, and it can be enormously freeing. It frees up our innate compassion, our innate wisdom. It helps us live a life of ease, joy, giving, and presence. And that's what we are meant to live. So in these times, when we're up against these challenges, take advantage of them. Question who you think you are. Because who you think you are is not who you are. Considering the deaths that have happened recently in the Sangha families, where did those mothers go? For that matter, where did we come from? Of course, we're born, but where did we come from? We know how children are conceived, but where does the personality, where does this little beingness arrive from? Can it simply be that two cells bonding produce such a wide range of personalities as are in this universe? Or is there something more going on? Is who we think we are simply the superficial level that society assumes is who we are and tries sometimes to force us into it? Or is there something deeper? Zen students for millennia have had that question and have dived into it so deeply as to forget themselves completely, which is essential to finding out who we really are. That's a sticky wicket right there. We hang on to this self-image for dear life, even if it's a negative one. And it keeps us trapped. Who are we without that? Dare to explore. I thank you for listening, and we'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.